Welcome back to Grounded by the Neutral Wire, where we keep you grounded. I'm Jules Mercer.
And I'm Eli Watts. We're here to cut through the static and follow the current of what's really powering our communities.
Today, we're embarking on a really crucial deep dive. We're looking at a proposed constitutional amendment right here in Ohio. And this isn't just some minor tweak to the tax code. Oh, no. It's this incredibly sweeping proposal that basically aims to abolish property taxes, like entirely across the whole state.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah, our mission is to really dissect this proposal properly. We want to break down Ohio's existing property tax system because, honestly, it can be confusing.
It really can.
And understand precisely what these taxes actually fund in our neighborhoods, our towns, our counties, and maybe most crucially, try to anticipate the wide-ranging consequences if something like this actually passed.
Right, because this topic, it's layered. There are hidden complexities, lots of different perspectives. We definitely need to examine those because, this touches the very fabric of our communities, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, let's unpack this then. We've all seen the discussions, right? Especially with home values going kind of wild the past few years. But this proposal, it just takes it to a whole new level. It's genuinely bold, a sweeping change that could fundamentally reshape Ohio.
It really could. And at the heart of it, you mentioned this group.
Right. It's a grassroots group. They call themselves the Committee to Eliminate Ohio Property Taxes.
Okay.
And their ambition is, it's laser-focused and incredibly clear. They want a constitutional amendment, period, to ban all taxes on real property in Ohio.
All of them. So no exceptions.
Seems like it's an all-or-nothing approach to what they see as, necessary reform. This isn't about tweaking things. It's a complete overhaul they're after.
And for something that big, how does that even get onto a ballot?
Yeah.
For people like you and me to vote on, what's the actual path for amending the Constitution here?
Yeah, it's definitely not simple for a proposal like this to make it to the ballot, especially looking ahead to maybe 2025 or beyond. It's a serious challenge for the committee. They need to collect a truly staggering number of signatures. We're talking more than 413,000.
Wow. Over 400,000.
Yeah. And it's not just hitting that big number statewide. Those signatures, they also have to be spread out, geographically diverse. Meaning they need signatures from at least 5% of the voters in a minimum of 44 different counties across Ohio.
44. Okay, so you can't just get them all from one or two big cities.
Exactly. It ensures there's broad cross-regional support or at least demonstrated interest, not just some concentrated push in one area. It's designed to be a high bar for anyone trying to change the state constitution.
That sounds like a massive undertaking. Huge organizational effort. Lots of resources needed.
No doubt.
But, okay, let's say they do it, they get the signatures, it makes it onto the ballot, and somehow it passes. The timeline you mentioned for putting it into effect, that sounded incredibly fast, almost worryingly fast.
It is incredibly swift. If this amendment were to pass, say, in a November election, it's written to take effect on the very first day of the next year.
So January 1st.
January 1st.
Right.
So if, hypothetically, Ohioans voted yes on this in November 2025, boom, January 1st, 2026, it's constitutionally effective.
Good.
And that creates this really fascinating and maybe precarious situation, especially when you think about how property taxes are actually collected now.
Right. That's the part that kind of trips me up. Because my understanding is we don't pay them in real time, do we? There's often a lag.
You're spot on. Exactly. Ohio's property taxes are typically collected a year in arrears.
In arrears. Meaning
the tax bill you might get, say, later this year in December 2025 and maybe pay in early 2026. That bill is actually based on your property's value from 2024.
Okay, got it. So it's looking backward.
Right. So if this amendment passed in late 2025, local governments would likely still collect property taxes at the current levels for the entire calendar year of 2026.
Because those payments are for the 2025 tax year.
Precisely. So the really unsettling question isn't so much about 2026. It's what happens 2 years later for the 2027 tax year and all the years after that. That's the big unknown.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is just the sheer scale and that timeline. It suggests this really rapid shift, a cliff edge almost, without a clear, defined path for what comes next. Or, critically, how all those services funded by these taxes would, keep the lights on.
Right. A rapid shift without a concrete replacement plan. That sounds like it could cause some serious problems, maybe even chaos for local governments.
That's the fear, absolutely. Financial chaos is a good way to put it.
Okay, so for many of us, myself included sometimes, property taxes feel like this confusing line item on a bill.
Mm.
It's something we pay, right? But maybe without fully grasping the mechanics. All the terms. Before we dig into where the money goes, maybe we should break down some of those fundamental concepts.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, there's a lot of jargon.
That's a really good idea. It's crucial because the system is built on several key terms that, yeah, they can seem pretty opaque. Let's start with millage.
Millage, okay.
Millage is simply the rate of tax. It's per $1,000 of your property's assessed value. So if you hear a tax rate is, say, 10 mils, it just means for every $1,000 of your property's assessed value, you pay $10 in tax for that specific levy or purpose. It's a tiny unit, right? A mill. But they add up fast when you combine all the different levies.
Okay, so mills are the rate. Then what's a levy? I hear that word all the time.
Right. A levy is a specific tax measure. It's proposed by a local government entity, could be your school district, fire department, park system, library, whatever.
Gotcha.
And then it has to be approved by the voters, by you, to fund particular services. The levy will specify the number of mills being asked for, and often it has a set time limit, like 5 years, 10 years, though some are permanent or continuing.
Okay. And I've also heard this term, the 20 mil floor. That sounds like a minimum. What does that mean for property owners, especially with home values going up so much?
The 20 mil floor, yeah, that's a really critical and often pretty misunderstood part of Ohio's system, especially for school districts.
Okay.
It refers to a state law, a provision, where school districts are guaranteed to collect at least 20 mils of property tax for their operating expenses, their day-to-day stuff.
Guaranteed minimum. Okay. So what does that mean when property values increase?
Well, it means that even if property values in a district that's at this floor, this 20 mil minimum, go up dramatically.
Yeah.
The school district's effective tax rate, that's the rate you actually pay. It won't automatically decrease below 20 mils to fully offset that increase in value.
Okay. So the rate doesn't drop enough to keep the bill flat, potentially.
Exactly. The mechanism is meant to provide a stable, sort of foundational funding level for schools, but the impact, well, roughly half of Butler County, for instance, is in a school district operating at this 20 mil floor.
Half the county. Wow.
Yeah. And we saw a very real impact back in 2023. There was a Middletown taxing district in Butler County after the state-mandated update of property values, the triennial update.
Right. They do that every 3 years?
Yep. Property taxes there shot up by 34%.
34%.
Yeah. And a big part of that was because the district was at that 20 mil floor. The rates couldn't legally be lowered enough to fully cushion the blow from rising property values. So in some districts, your home value skyrockets, but your tax rate doesn't drop proportionally.
Leading to huge increases for homeowners.
Exactly. Even when voters haven't approved any new taxes, it's baked into the system. It highlights how these mechanisms can really hit homeowners hard. It's a fixed floor that doesn't always adjust, and that's a real pain point.
Yeah, I can see how that 20 mil floor could be a major source of frustration. Has there been much pushback on that or attempts to change it?
Oh, definitely. There's been significant frustration, lots of talk, especially as values surge. You hear about it a lot. There have been ongoing discussions, some legislative proposals aimed at providing relief.
Like what?
Things like maybe capping how much taxable values can increase each year, or making exemptions like the homestead exemption more robust. But honestly, finding a consensus on how to fix it without, destabilizing school funding, that's proven really challenging. It's pretty fundamental to how schools are funded locally right now.
Okay, so that's the 20 mil floor. What about other, maybe less understood tools? You hear about TIFs. Sounds like sci-fi.
TIFs, tax increment financing. They do sound a bit out there, but they're not sci-fi. They're actually a very real and pretty widely used development tool.
Okay, how do they work?
They let local governments fund specific development projects or maybe infrastructure improvements in a set area, but without imposing new taxes on everyone else.
Interesting.
So here's the idea. A TIF basically earmarks the future property tax revenue increases that come from a specific new development or maybe a revitalized area.
The increases only.
Right, the increment. So instead of that new money going to the usual places like the general funds for schools or libraries, it gets diverted back into that specific TIF district
To pay for what?
to pay for improvements within that area. Could be new roads, water lines, parking structures, things that directly support that new development.
Okay, I think I get it. Like using the new value created to pay for the stuff that helped create it.
Exactly. We see examples in the City of Grove City's 2025 budget. They list specific TIF revenue bonds for things like the Buckeye Center TIF, the Pinnacle TIF, the Lumberyard TIF.
So real projects.
Totally.
Mm.
These represent actual debt they've taken on, tied to this TIF mechanism. It shows how they use TIFs to try and spur growth, fund infrastructure, by basically leveraging those expected future tax gains. The goal is to attract businesses or maybe revitalize areas that need it.
But does that mean schools and other services don't get the benefit of that increased property value inside the TIF zone?
Well, not initially, no. That's the trade-off. The regular tax base doesn't see that increased revenue from within the TIF district right away. And yeah, that can sometimes create a bit of tension between, say, a city creating a TIF and the school district that covers that same area.
Okay, so millage, levies, the 20-year floor, TIFs. Yeah, it feels like you almost need a finance degree sometimes.
Right.
Could you maybe just walk us through a simple breakdown? How does my actual property tax bill get calculated start to finish?
Yeah, let's try to cut through the complexity. At its most basic, your bill starts with what's called the base property tax.
Okay, base tax.
That's figured out by taking your property's assessed value, which, importantly, is usually 35% of its market value in Ohio, not the full 100%.
Okay, that's a key point, 35%.
Right. You take that 35% assessed value and multiply it by all the different millage rates added together, from your school district, your city, your township, your county, maybe a library district, park district, and so on.
All those levies we talked about.
Exactly. They all get added up into one combined rate. Then, sometimes, special assessments might be added on top of that.
Special assessments.
These are specific charges for specific projects that directly benefit your property or a really small area, like maybe new water lines down your street or sewer upgrades or stormwater stuff. They aren't part of the general millage, but they often get tacked onto your tax bill for collection.
Okay, so base tax plus special assessments equals?
Your total property tax. But wait! There's more.
Of course there is.
You don't always pay that full total. From that total property tax, reduction credits are subtracted.
Like discounts.
Kind of. The most common one is the homestead exemption. This offers pretty significant tax relief, mainly for senior citizens, people with certain disabilities, or surviving spouses who meet the criteria.
Okay, the homestead exemption, I've heard of that.
So after you apply any reduction credits you qualify for, then you get the final number, the property tax owed. That's what you actually pay.
Got it. Base tax plus assessments credits, what I owe.
Pretty much. And remember that base value, the assessed value, it's updated every 3 years based on things like comparable sales in your area. So the housing market is always playing a role, sometimes pushing your bill up even if your income hasn't changed.
Right. That clarifies the individual bill calculation.
Yeah.
But looking across Ohio, it seems like taxes vary wildly. Like my bill might be totally different from someone in the next county over, even with a similar house. That disparity seems huge.
Oh, it's definitely significant. It really shows how localized this whole system is. Let's use Union County as a concrete example, using 2023 data, which is what informs the bills people are paying now in 2025.
Okay, Union County.
The median housing value there was about $269,500. And for those homes, the median property taxes paid were just under $3,000. $2,997 to be exact.
Okay.
That works out to an effective property tax rate of about 1.11%.
1.11%. How does that compare?
Well, contrast that with a place like Cuyahoga County, Cleveland area. Their effective rate in 2023 was much higher, 2.08%, even though the median home value was lower there, around $183,000. The median tax bill was higher, over $3,800.
Wow, almost double the effective rate.
Pretty much. And then you have counties on the lower end, like Adams County, where the effective rate was just 0.83%.
Less than 1%.
Right. So it's not just about home values. It reflects the local cost of government, the number and type of services communities choose to fund through levies, the history of voter decisions. It really is a patchwork quilt across Ohio, not a uniform blanket at all. And those differences mean real money, hundreds, even thousands of dollars a year for homeowner.
Okay. So what does this all mean for us? We've talked about how it's calculated, how it varies. But the big question, the really crucial one, where does all this property tax money actually go? What services does it fund right here in our communities?
Right.
Because you hear that claim all the time, right? Oh, 70% of it just goes to schools. Is that actually true?
That's the critical question, Eli, and it's so important to clarify that common claim. While schools are the single biggest recipient, yeah, that 70% goes to schools figure, it's often an oversimplification, or maybe it's an outdated number for some specific places.
Okay, so what's the real number?
Looking at the current fiscal year, 2025, the statewide picture shows about $13 billion out of roughly $24 billion in total property tax revenue going to school districts.
13 out of 24.
Yeah.
So that's closer to 54%.
Exactly. Just over half. Still the biggest slice by far, but not 70%. The other billions, that remaining, $11 billion, that supports a huge range of other absolutely vital local services, stuff we rely on every single day.
And without property taxes, those services would be
Severely curtailed or potentially just disappear. Property taxes are really the financial bloodstream of your immediate community. They fund this broad spectrum of services that make daily life possible, safe, civilized.
Let's dive deeper into those services then, starting with schools, since, yeah, they are the biggest piece of the pie.
Okay, schools. For Ohio's traditional public schools, property taxes are, without a doubt, their primary local funding source. This money is absolutely critical. It covers day-to-day operations, programming,
Like what specifically?
teacher salaries, classroom supplies, building maintenance, busing, technology, extracurriculars, basically everything that makes a school run.
Okay.
Let's look at the Marysville Exempted Village School District. They offer a really good kind of telling example of how deeply schools rely on this local money.
Marysville, okay. Union County.
Right. Now, interestingly, by the state's funding formula, Marysville is actually considered a wealthy district.
Wealthy, meaning
Meaning they get significantly less state aid than many other districts. Their state revenue per pupil has barely budged in years, unlike the state average, which has gone up more.
so they rely more on local money.
Heavily. And despite that, Marysville has shown really strong fiscal responsibility. Their average cost per student is way below the state average. They're also growing, adding about 100 students a year, and seeing costs rise, especially for things like special education, up 30% in the last 5 years.
Wow.
And another big hit for them and lots of districts was the state getting rid of those tangible personal property tax reimbursements, the TPP money.
Right, that's phasing out completely.
It's gone by the end of 2024, impacting the 2025 tax year. For Marysville, that loss is equivalent to 5.6 mils of funding, a huge hit to their operating budget.
Okay. And you mentioned buckets of school funding earlier.
Yeah, it's helpful to think of it that way. There are basically three main buckets, and the money in each has really specific, legally defined uses. You can't just mix and match.
Okay, what are the buckets?
First is the bond fund. This money can only be used to pay off bonds, the debt taken out, usually to build new schools or do massive renovations. That's it. Can't use it for salaries or books.
Okay, bond fund for buildings. Got it.
Yeah. Second is the Permanent Improvement Fund, or PI Fund. This bucket is for maintaining existing buildings, buying school buses, upgrading technology, fixing parking lots, that kind of stuff. Long-term assets.
Permanent improvements. Makes sense.
Marysville actually, through careful management, used existing PI funds for big projects like renovating the high school gym and adding classrooms at an elementary school. That saved taxpayers from needing a new tax increase specifically for those projects.
That's good planning.
It is. But here's the catch. PI funds cannot be used for day-to-day operating expenses. No teacher salaries, no utility bills, no program costs. Strictly for capital stuff.
Okay, so bond fund for building, PI fund for maintaining. What's the third bucket?
The third, and maybe the most crucial for everyday schooling, is the operating fund. This is the money that keeps the lights on, pays the teachers, buys the textbooks, runs the programs, the day-to-day stuff.
And this relies heavily on local levies.
Hugely. Especially in districts like Marysville that don't get as much state aid. They recently had a 5.5 mil 10-year emergency levy approved by voters.
Okay, how much does that bring in?
About $6.8 million a year. And it costs homeowners about $192 per $100,000 of home value.
And was that levy critical?
Absolutely critical. Without it, the district was facing cuts of 30 teaching and staff positions. The superintendent was very clear. They would have seen drastic reduction of things like art, music, physical education across the district, STEM programs, elective courses, AP courses, all for the 2025-26 school year.
Wow. So the operating levy directly impacts class sizes, program availability, the core educational experience.
Directly. It's the tangible cost of maintaining those programs and keeping qualified staff. It shows just how vital those voter-approved operating levies are.
Okay. So schools, clearly a huge piece, about half the property tax revenue. But what about keeping communities safe? How do property taxes play into fire, EMS, police services?
Public safety is another absolutely critical area, Eli. It's heavily funded by property taxes, especially at the township and village level. Many townships, for instance, don't have municipal income tax, so property tax is pretty much it for funding these essential services.
Services like fire trucks and police cars.
Exactly. Literally life-saving services. Let's take Springfield Township in Hamilton County. They had issue 24, a 3.5 mil levy on the ballot recently. It was specifically designed just to maintain their current fire MS service levels through 2030.
Just maintain, not expand.
Right. Their projections showed that without it, their reserve funds would have run out. That would mean service reductions, slower response times maybe, and continuing to use really old equipment like a 30-year-old fire truck.
Hotcakes.
Passing that levy means they can keep current service levels, hopefully attract and retain good staff, and even continue fire safety education in schools. It translates directly to firefighters on duty, ambulance speed, police presence.
And we see this elsewhere, too.
Oh, yeah. Liberty Township in Butler County saw a small increase, 0.3 mils, in its police levy approved in March 2025. Added about $10.50 per $100 K value, but it was deemed essential to keep their police protection funded.
Small increase, big impact if it fails.
Totally. New Miami Village, also Butler County, passed a 6 mil fire levy and a 3 mil street levy in November 2024, collecting now in 2025. That was a bigger increase, about $332 per $100. Oxford City passed a 2.6 mil fire MS levy too, adding about $106 per 100 tire.
So communities are consistently voting to fund these services via property tax.
They are. And it's not just about emergency response. Think about ongoing costs. The city of Grove City Police, for instance, they're working on getting federally compliant accreditation this year, 2025. That costs money, involves training, meeting standards, all supported by the general operating budget, which relies in part on property taxes. These are vital services directly affecting safety, and they lean heavily on that stable property tax base.
Okay. And roads, bridges. You hear constantly about infrastructure needing money.
Yeah.
How much of that ties back to property taxes, especially for those big long-term projects?
Infrastructure is definitely another major area. It's fundamental, right, to daily life, the economy, and counties especially carry a big load for maintaining roads, bridges, sewer systems, stormwater management.
Stuff that lasts decades.
Exactly, and it requires sustained long-term investment. Look at Grove City's 2025 tax budget again. It lists a whole bunch of major road projects, Hoover Road, Stringtown Road, others funded through Ohio Public Works Commission loans, OPWC loans.
Okay.
But those loans have to be repaid. And the repayment schedules stretch way out, some as far as 2047. That shows the multi-decade commitment needed. And these projects are often tied directly to local funding sources, including property taxes, or maybe related things like TIFs that leverage future property tax growth.
Does property taxes help secure or repay those long-term infrastructure loans?
Often, yes. And the public seems to support this. Statewide Issue 2, a public works amendment, passed with nearly 68% approval in May 2025. That shows strong public backing for infrastructure work, which again often relies on local funding streams underpinned by property taxes. Without this funding, roads crumble, bridges become unsafe, water systems degrade. It impacts quality of life, safety, economic development, everything.
So it's definitely not just the big three: schools, safety, roads.
Right.
What else are we funding with property taxes that maybe we don't think about every day but are still really important to our communities?
That's a great point, Eli. There are so many other essential local services that really enrich our lives and provide crucial safety nets, and they too are heavily dependent on property tax revenue. Think about public library,
Love the library.
parks and recreation areas, public health departments, services specifically for senior citizens. These entities often rely significantly on dedicated levies funded by property taxes. That money directly impacts their ability to even operate and serve the community.
Can you give an example, like parks?
Sure. Let's look at Lake Metro Parks up in Lake County. Their 2025 budget request summary gives a good picture. Of course, it covers salaries, rangers, planners, admin, staff. But look at the projects. They budgeted $2.3 million just for infrastructure repair and replacement.
Like what?
Things like replacing restroom doors park-wide, that's $18,000. Bigger structure repairs for $60,000. Basic upkeep. But also new initiatives, $3.3 million budgeted. That includes a new flush restroom and shelter at one park for $300,000. Phase 2 of a big lakefront trail project for $1.5 million. Even small stuff like new interpretive science for $7,000.
Wow. That's a lot of specific projects funded by park levies.
Absolutely. And think about their visitor services division, budgeted at over $350,000 for 2025. They handle program registrations for over 70,000 people, manage reservations for shelters, cabins, camping, facility rentals. It shows the sheer breadth of services supported by those park levies, from nature trails to community events.
Okay, parks and libraries. What about safety nets, social services?
That's another huge one. County Human Services departments provide those critical safety nets: vital counseling, rehab services, child and adult protective services, ensuring the well-being of vulnerable people.
And those are strained, right?
Increasingly, you hear about the exploding costs associated with the opiate epidemic, for instance. That's crippling justice and public safety budgets at the county level. Counties are seeing huge increases in drug-related criminal cases, demanding more resources for prevention, treatment, law enforcement. Without stable local funding from property taxes, these vital social services would really struggle.
Leading to bigger societal problems down the line.
Exactly. And remember, almost all municipalities in Ohio, 921 out of 927, levy some form of property tax. And for about a third of them, the ones that don't have a city income tax, property tax isn't just a source of revenue, it's the critical source.
Funding what, at the city-village level?
General operations, sure, but also localized police and fire, street cleaning and paving within city limits, street lights, local parks, cemetery upkeep, senior centers. All those very specific, tangible services that make a town livable and vibrant. Every time you use a local park, check out a library book, see clean streets, you're benefiting from property taxes. It's the cost of a functioning local society.
Okay. So we've painted a pretty clear picture of what these taxes fund, a vast array of essential services top to bottom. So now the start question. If property taxes just vanished, like this amendment proposes, what actually happens? What's the real-world ripple effect on these services, on our communities?
The scale of the potential loss is it's staggering, Eli. And the ripple effect would be profound. It would hit every single Ohioan. We're talking an estimated statewide loss of roughly $24 billion annually.
$24 billion.
Gone. And as we said, about $13 billion of that hits school districts directly, potentially wiping out their main local funding source overnight.
Can you put that in perspective locally, like Butler County?
Yeah, a Butler County auditor's office did the math. They project a loss for their county alone of about $660 million. Of that, $393 million would vanish from school districts and another $114 million from townships and villages.
Just gone.
And the warnings from county auditors from the Ohio Township Association, they've been incredibly stark, unequivocal. They use words like decimate vital services. They say it would leave townships, especially, with no path forward.
No path forward. That sounds dire.
It is. This isn't hyperbole. Townships often lack income tax power. Without property tax revenue, how do they fund fire, EMS, local police? It likely means longer response times, old equipment, maybe even services ceasing entirely in some places, road maintenance, snow plowing, even just keeping the township hall open. It jeopardizes everything. It could fundamentally break local government and service delivery as we know it.
Creating a vacuum that's almost impossible to fill quickly.
Exactly. A huge vacuum.
And the amendment itself, you said earlier, it doesn't actually provide a replacement plan. It just says no more property taxes.
That's maybe the biggest, most alarming part of this whole thing. The proposal does not address how the statewide loss would be offset. Nothing specific.
Oh, so how would that $24 billion hole get filled? What are proponents suggesting?
Well, proponents have vaguely suggested alternatives. You hear things like, oh, the state can just increase income taxes or boost the sales tax. But the reality is, state lawmakers would have to take truly drastic, unprecedented action to make up that kind of shortfall.
Drastic how?
Think about the scale. $24 billion. Just for the state to pick up a much bigger share of school funding would massively strain the state budget. Then, for townships and villages, the state might need to let them collect income taxes, which they mostly can't now, or massively increase state aid payments to them.
And sales tax.
Ohio's state sales tax is 5.75% now. Local taxes can bring it up to 8% in some places. To generate $24 billion just from sales tax, you'd need an astronomical increase. We could be talking double-digit sales tax rates, easily, among the highest in the nation.
Which would hit consumers hard, and businesses.
Immensely. And this kind of massive legislative overhaul, financial experts, local officials, they overwhelmingly say it just cannot be done responsibly in less than a year. The political fights, the economic impact studies, the complex planning. It would normally take years, not months, to even attempt such a fundamental shift without causing immense new problems. Expecting the legislature to pull this off so quickly and effectively seems, well, unrealistic to many.
So without those replacement funds ready to go on day one, or with some rushed, inadequate plan, we're looking at immediate, direct, severe service cuts across the board.
Absolutely. Without a comprehensive, immediate, fully funded replacement for $24 billion, local governments would burn through reserves incredibly fast. They'd have to delay or cancel vital projects, road paving, new fire trucks, school repairs, and ultimately, yes, they'd be forced to reduce services everywhere.
Like the examples we talked about.
Exactly. Think back to Marysville schools. If their levy had failed, 30 teaching and staff positions cut, drastic reduction of art, music, PE, STEM, AP courses. Not small tweaks, fundamental cuts to education.
In the fire department example.
Springfield Township Fire. Without their levy, they projected having to reduce services and keep using outdated and old equipment. That's slower emergency response. Potentially tragic consequences. Libraries would cut hours, staff, books, parks would become rundown, programs canceled, public health clinics might close, human services would have to turn people away.
It's a domino effect.
It truly is. If property taxes vanish, the foundation crumbles for everyone who relies on them. Schools, police, fire, libraries, parks, social services, roads. Pulling that one piece risks collapsing the whole structure of local services and quality of life. It's not abstract finance, it's tangible impacts on every single resident.
And this whole proposal, it isn't happening in a vacuum, is it? It kind of connects to this broader, ongoing debate we see, especially around school funding and state control.
It certainly does. The push to eliminate property taxes isn't isolated. It ties right into ongoing controversies about school funding, local control versus state oversight. It's all interconnected.
Like the debate over school cash reserves.
Exactly. Right now in the state budget discussions for this year, HB 96 in the House version has language saying school districts holding more than 30% of their budget in cash reserves should refund the rest to taxpayers.
And schools are pushing back?
Strongly. They argue it would be financially devastating, could leave them in the red within 2 years. They say those reserves aren't just sitting there. They're for emergencies, big infrequent payments, managing cash flow between state aid deposits, a critical rainy day fund.
Is there agreement on that in the legislature?
Not entirely. Senate President Rob McCauley, for instance, thinks 30% might be too low as a threshold. He acknowledges some districts do have huge balances, maybe over 200%, but he also stresses that property tax reform itself is not a Republican-Democrat issue. It's a complex challenge needing bipartisan work, which kind of highlights the difficulty of state intervention in local funding.
And people are watching closely.
Oh, yeah. You see discussions online, like on Reddit. One user pointed out a claim about a state budget proposal deferring money from schools to pay for the Browns stadium maintenance, things like that, fuel concerns about state priorities versus local needs. So yeah, this amendment push is happening against a backdrop of already complex and sometimes contentious debates about public finance.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. We hear it all the time, right? People saying taxes just vanish into the evil government, or I don't see where my money goes, or even that philosophical thing. Property taxes mean you never really own your home. It's just a rental from the state.
Yeah.
But you're saying that's a dangerous oversimplification.
It's absolutely a misconception, Eli. And yeah, a potentially dangerous one, because it ignores the reality of what those taxes do. The idea that the money is just gone or swallowed by some faceless bureaucracy, it's just not true.
Yeah.
As we've spent the last, half hour detailing. That money actually goes to fund your schools, your roads, your fire and EMS, police, parks, libraries, public health, safety nets. It is the burden we collectively pay for a functioning, civilized society, for the shared good that lets communities operate and provide a basic quality of life. These are real services people rely on daily, often without thinking about the property tax connection.
And the you never really own it argument.
That philosophical point often misses the historical context. Property taxes evolved precisely because they were a stable way to fund local services and infrastructure that actually increase the value and desirability of that very property you own.
So the taxes pay for things that make the property worth owning in the first place.
Exactly. Good schools, safe streets, maintained parks, those things make your property more valuable, more desirable. You're not just paying abstract government, you're investing in the foundational services that make your community livable, marketable, secure. And besides, it's not like you pay taxes on 100% of the value with no relief. The system already has limits, caps, and exemptions, like the homestead exemption, trying to build in some protections and fairness.
Okay. And thinking about who is burdened or who might benefit.
Yep.
There's a very real human element here, isn't there?
Yeah.
Especially for some groups, like senior citizens.
There absolutely is, and it's often a very emotional part of the debate. The concern about rising property values hitting seniors on fixed incomes, that's very real.
Yeah.
They might have a valuable house, lots of equity, but not much cash flow day to day. So even if the house value goes up, they struggle to pay the higher tax bill. There's that story in Newsweek, a citizen called about her assessment increase and was basically told, if you can't afford your property taxes, maybe you should move.
Oof. That's harsh.
Incredibly harsh for someone who's lived there for decades. And you see this tension online, too. Discussions on Reddit sometimes pit seniors worried about taxes on valuable homes against younger generations struggling with debt just to afford a home. It becomes generational conflict when the root issue is often affordability and a tax system maybe not perfectly aligned with income versus assets.
Yes, and it's not just homeowners effectors, right? What about renters?
That's a crucial point, often overlooked. Renters make up a huge part of Ohio's population. What happens to them if property taxes disappear? One Redditor speculated that landlords might just pocket the savings, not lower rent, since their own tax burden is gone.
So renters might not see any benefit.
Worse, they might end up paying more if the state shifts the tax burden. If replacement revenue comes from, say, double sales tax and 10x car registration, as that Redditor suggested.
Renters pay sales tax, renters pay car registration.
Exactly. So renters could see their cost of living go up through other taxes without ever getting the direct relief homeowners might hope for. It could fundamentally shift the tax burden onto people potentially least able to afford it without the perceived benefit of owning property. It's this complex web. Any big change pulls on all the threads.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the voter? When you hear about a sweeping proposal like this, it's clearly not a simple yes or no. There are so many layers, such profound potential impacts.
That's precisely it. This isn't a bumper sticker issue. It demands real critical thinking, looking beyond the slogan. Voters really should be asking some smart, practical questions to get underneath the surface.
Like what? What should people be asking?
First, what is the specific, detailed plan to replace the $24 billion? How, exactly? And how realistic is it to implement that plan in less than a year? Vague promises aren't enough when essential funding is on the line. Need a blueprint.
Okay, what else?
Second, how will this amendment guarantee that essential services, schools, fire, police, roads, libraries, health will maintain their quality or even improve? The current system, flaws and all, links local taxes to local accountability. How is that preserved or replaced effectively so community quality of life doesn't just tank?
Good question. What's number 3?
Third, what are the long-term economic consequences for everyone? Homeowners, yes, but also renters, businesses. Who ultimately pays more under a new system? Who pays less? Does it make Ohio more or less attractive to live and work in? Does it drive up the cost of living disproportionately for some?
And finally,
Are there other ways? Less drastic approaches to property tax reform that could offer relief without risking the whole foundation. We mentioned California capping increases, or maybe something different like a land value tax like Estonia uses. Are we exploring options or just jumping to the most extreme choice? These questions push past the easy answer and get to the heart of what makes our communities work.
it really does come down to finding that balance, doesn't it? The desire for tax relief is totally understandable, but it has to be weighed against the very real impact on the services that define our communities, our quality of life. Thinking critically means understanding that trade-off and really asking, what kind of future are we voting for? One that keeps vital local services running, or one that leaves them fighting for survival?
That's it for this deep dive into Ohio's proposed property tax amendment. We hope it gave you something to think about and maybe a few more informed questions to ask as this debate continues.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, understanding how our communities are funded, it's just key. It's essential for informed participation. And proposals this big, they really force us to ask fundamental questions about that social contract, between citizens and their local governments. What are we willing to pay for? And what are the true costs if we don't?
If you found it helpful, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, let us know what you'd like us to dig into next.
Whether it's a local levy or a statewide shift, we'll be here to help you follow the current.
Until next time, stay grounded.